I'm an artist, and I love what I do. But I'm not here to tell you all about how great it is to be an artist or how you should all make art your career. In fact, paying less attention to what others say you should or shouldn't do, and more attention to what interests you and what you're capable of doing is what I'm here to talk to you about today. For the first 30 years of my life, I was game for everything, and I felt a tremendous enthusiasm for living. I threw myself into foreign languages, like Japanese, into foreign travel and sport. And then for one grim period in my 30s, I lost my enthusiasm. I spent my time engaged in what I thought I should love doing rather than what I truly loved. I was wasting my passions. Mottainai, as the Japanese say, what a waste. It was only when I was utterly miserable in a job I wasn't any good at, in a job that I didn't like at all, that I finally went back to committing myself to what I was passionate about. I'm here to share with you today how I made the most important decision of my life, a decision to embrace art and release myself from the clutches of the law. As a child, I dabbled in art, encouraged to do so by my mother. But my first passionate interest was the Japanese language, and from the age of 12, I began to study Japanese in my neighborhood. Alongside my interest in Japanese arose a commitment to long-distance running. In high school, I ran over 100 miles a week, and in college and graduate school, running continued to rule my life. Art was nowhere on my radar. When I graduated, I thought briefly about going to law school, like so many of my peers had done. But I found a job prospectus for a much more interesting possibility. Foreign liaison representative for a patent and law office in Seoul, Korea. Now, Korea today is a high-tech, modern democracy, but back then it was a repressive military dictatorship, far behind Japan in terms of its economic development. There were plainclothes policemen on the street, and foreign trade was restricted. You couldn't buy a banana on the open market. But as it turned out, Korea was a great place for an oddball interested in studying Asian languages, someone like me. And every day after work, I studied the language, and I went everywhere in Seoul, exploring its hidden corners and speaking Korean to everyone I met. I also spent a lot of time running. Now, Seoul is an urban jungle, but in the center of town, there's a tree-covered hill, accessed by a steep 2-mile road, and I ran up and down that road every day, 4 times a day, for 2 years. As long as I was in Seoul, I felt insulated from the pressures of adulthood. None of the pressures affecting my peers in the States affected me. But when I came back to the States, I felt a kind of culture shock. And I decided it was time to take life seriously. Taking life serious to me at the time meant going to law school. I wasn't particularly interested in law, but I thought here was a field in which I could use my Japanese language skills. So I applied to law schools. And with luck and good timing on my side, I got into Harvard. Now, Harvard being Harvard, I thought, now I should really focus on my studies. But before I did, I thought I'd run one last race. And I flew to Eugene, Oregon to run a marathon. I ran the marathon in a time of 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 59 seconds. A time fast enough by 1 second to receive an all-expenses-paid invitation to run in the 1982 New York Marathon as one of the 72 so-called elite runners. Well, I was thrilled. And I skipped my first classes at Harvard, and I flew to New York to run the race. I started the race at the rock bottom of that pile of 72 so-called elite runners in a field of 16,000. I finished the race in 3rd place. Well, 3rd place, needless to say, was beyond my wildest dreams. And the excitement of finishing 3rd was increased by the fact that the result was so unexpected. As a commentator for ABC News said live on air during the race, if anyone thinks they know who Dan Schlesinger is, they should think again. 3rd place. And suddenly, qualification for the US Olympic team seemed a realistic possibility. Running was back on the agenda, and I returned to Harvard with a new resolution. I was going to train as well as study. Unfortunately, this wasn't a resolution that anyone else was making at Harvard Law School. And as I sat there in a sea of 150 students, waiting for the professor to call in on one of us, the woman to my right responded to the professor with the intensity, with the interest level of a religious disciple. I, on the other hand, couldn't have cared less. I was already thinking about my afternoon workout and of this charming law student I just met, Allison Weatherfield, whom I later married. But with 3 years of law school to go, I knew I was in the wrong place, I didn't like what I was doing, and I wasn't any good at it. But still, I stuck with it, persuading myself that I could use my law degree for something other than working at a big city law firm. And then with a remarkable lack of imagination, I applied for work at a big city law firm. What I was about to do was thrust myself into an environment that would snuff out my passionate interests in running in Japanese and family life. And I was completely distressed by it, but I went ahead and did it. I suppose my employers thought that, employers who gave me a job at a big city law firm, thought that discipline as a runner, training for the US Olympic trials, would translate somehow into high performance as a lawyer. In fact, discipline as a runner, training for the US Olympic trials, translated to no such thing. Discipline as a runner was just that, discipline as a runner and nothing else. Every day at the law firm, as long as I was working at the law firm, I woke up with the Olympics on my mind. Before starting work, I went to Central Park, ran 6 miles around the park, before returning to the office to do a bit of work, before returning to the park to do an afternoon workout, leaving my unfinished work for my colleagues to do. Now, this didn't go down terribly well with my colleagues, nor with my employers. But still I kept at it, training and getting into the best shape of my life, until just 2 weeks before the US Olympic trials, I injured myself, and I couldn't contest for a place. I was crushed by this disappointment, and that disappointment was compounded by the fact that I was losing my focus on running, a focus which had long distracted me from my unfulfilling and unsuccessful life as a lawyer. There were no excuses. There was no ambiguity. I was failing at my profession, a profession in which I felt not the slightest passion or interest. I was 35, an age at which all my classmates at Harvard were succeeding at their careers, and I was nowhere professionally. I felt a failure, and that failure pervaded all aspects of my life. But my legal career, with its downward trajectory, still hadn't run its course. And I accepted an offer to work at a law firm in Japan. Unfortunately, my transfer coincided with the bursting of the Japanese economic bubble, and there was no legal work to do. I was completely idle. My office came to a depressing standstill. I wandered around Tokyo aimlessly, drowning my sorrows in bowls of ramen and sulking. And there, in the middle of Tokyo, amidst the bars, amidst the pachinko parlors, amidst the banks and department stores, I came across a workshop where Japanese artisans were making woodblock prints using traditional tools and blocks of cherry wood. I was thrilled. I'd always been fascinated by Japanese woodblock prints, by the traditional images of the courtesans, of kabuki actors, of the Great Wave, and of Mount Fuji, and I persuaded the artisans to teach me how to make woodblock prints. Every day I went there to explore my passion, conceiving designs that had as their subject matter my family. I produced print after print, and with the production of every print, my spirits rose. This was a great omen for the future. In 1990, with Japan and me still in the rut, I moved to London, where Allison was from. I was still working as a lawyer, still making woodblock prints in my spare time, but I couldn't find a way from law to art. I tried selling my prints, but woodblock prints weren't remunerative. I thought about what else I could do. I thought about starting a business where I would teach Japanese expatriates how to negotiate life in London. But what eventually rescued me from my situation was not some grandiose business plan. It was something as simple as the stuff I drew with. What transformed my life was finding the right artistic medium. Now, it had to be a choice between watercolors and pastels, because without a studio space dedicated to painting, I couldn't do oil painting. Watercolors were wishy-washy, but pastels were vivid. And unlike my woodblock prints, my pastels sold. I suppose it was because of all the color I used. I used color lavishly. I still do. Or perhaps it was the accessibility of my subject matter, not my family life, but London, its parks with all its deer, and its architecture, St. Paul's and the River Thames. This was a fantastic, fantastic awakening for me. I drew and sold, and before long, I was making enough money as an artist to leave the practice of law forever. When I finally found my way from law to art, suddenly opportunities so scarce, opportunities I couldn't have imagined were suddenly on my doorstep. It was at this time, in the summer of 1995, that I received a visit from a Japanese friend of mine that dramatically changed my life. I had met Yuko Matsuoka on a plane from Tokyo to London in the 70s. She was a simultaneous interpreter, married to the owner of Seizansha, a small Japanese publishing house with a reputation for releasing worthy titles that didn't sell. Now, all these later, Yuko was visiting me in London. Her husband had died, and she had inherited the publishing house. She was looking for a book to publish. Now, just at this time, my 9-year-old son, Noah, had read an English book of fantasy that appealed to children and adults alike. I read the book from cover to cover. I loved it, and I referred it to Yuko, suggesting that she contact the author about getting the rights to publish the book in Japan. Yuko approached the author, a hitherto unknown writer by the name of J.K. Rowling. The book was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. J.K. Rowling was impressed by the fact that Yuko was a female entrepreneur, and she gave her the rights to publish the book in Japan. Yuko was impressed by my work in pastels and asked me to become the cover designer for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. She asked me eventually to design covers for the whole series. Here are a few of examples of the covers. She also asked me to illustrate the book in the form of line drawings. Yuko and I couldn't have imagined what would happen. After all, J.K. Rowling was a hitherto unknown writer whose name was anything but a household name, and she'd only published one book. I was an inexperienced illustrator. In fact, I'd never done an illustration for as much as a single book. But by the end of the project, 7 book covers and 199 illustrations later, I was anything but inexperienced. Harry Potter became a runaway bestseller in Japan. And that popularity induced a Japanese entrepreneur to approach me with an idea. If I would give him 50 oil paintings in 3 months, he would do a show of my work and pay me $50,000. Well, this was an offer I couldn't possibly refuse. But the trouble was, I didn't have a single oil painting in my inventory. The reason being, I'd never painted one. This led to one of the greatest artistic opportunities of my life. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken me years to learn to work with oils. But with a commission to do 50 oil paintings in 3 months, I had to learn to use oils quickly. I conducted what amounted to 50 experiments in oil painting, using the skills I developed as an artist working in pastel, skills in color and design. This self-taught crash course in oil painting gave me the skills I used to make a living for the rest of my life. And I used those skills to travel the Muggle world. I was invited to Japan to give exhibitions and talk shows, and I went around the world at my leisure seeking inspiration for my art. To London, to Venice, to Florence, to Africa, through forests, mountains, and oceans. I even revisited Hogwarts. In a series of signs of the zodiac, my Gemini twins are wizards, and my Libra is a goblin from Gringotts Bank measuring the moon and stars. I even got to the Olympics through my art. And now here I am in New York City. This is not to say that being an artist is without its disappointments. I've had shows at which people vied for my work in a state of art rage, but I've also had shows at which I didn't sell a thing. But the important thing is that I'm an artist and I love what I do. It often occurs to me that it took me a long time to become an artist, and I wonder if I should have started down that road sooner. But then I think about all the benefits of the things I did along the way and how they actually paved my way to becoming an artist. Speaking Japanese fostered my relationship with Yuko Matsuoka, who became the publisher of Harry Potter in Japan. Being a long-distance runner opened my eyes to the possibility of doing something other than law as a career. And working as a lawyer in Japan gave me access to that workshop where I started down the path to being an artist. The opportunities I had were unique to me, but the resources I used to pursue those opportunities were not unique. When I speak about resources, I'm not talking about networking and connections. I'm talking about inner resources, persevering, being open to change, and being curious. I hope that all of you have found something you love to do with your lives, or you're on the road to finding something you love to do with your lives. I hope that all of you have had mentors or teachers who have said, it's all right to explore with uncertainty. It's all right to say yes to something when you're not sure what the consequences will be. And it's all right to take risks that are unplanned. It's not going to be easy. The pressure to maximize economic security may prove irresistible, leaving you dissatisfied. But if you remember one thing from my talk today, remember this. It's okay to be dissatisfied, but it's not okay to have dissatisfaction as your status quo. Explore, explore, and explore again until you find what sparks your passions. Cultivate your interests early. But remember this, it's never too late to start. Thank you.